Hello, I am Derek Monroe, 36 years old, a lieutenant colonel in the United States Army. I live a disciplined life where every step is carefully calculated. But if you ask me where my heart truly belongs, I'll tell you about a mansion on a hill in the suburbs of Virginia. It's worth about $70 million, an immense fortune. That's where I grew up, where I learned the meaning of love, responsibility, and integrity. That place is not just a house. It's my entire world where my parents, Raymond and Barbara Monroe, instilled in me the values I carry throughout my life. But let me tell you, this story isn't just about me. It's about family, legacy, and the lessons that shaped who I am today. Our family mansion sits on a gentle hillside, where towering pines stand like sentinels guarding the estate. The morning sunlight filters through the foliage, casting shimmering patches of light across the lawn, as if nature itself is painting a picture just for us. The house, with its pale gray stone walls and soaring windows, is not merely an architectural marvel. It's a symbol of the love and dedication my parents built. Every corner of the house, every room tells a story of our family, of the warm days I will never forget. I was born in that house, raised in the loving arms of my parents and the laughter of my younger brother, Ethan. My father, Raymond Monroe, was a tall man with salt and pepper hair and sharp, piercing eyes. He was a successful businessman, the founder of a renowned investment firm in Virginia. But what made me respect him wasn't his wealth or fame, it was the way he lived. My father always told me, "Derek, a man's worth isn't measured by the money he has, but by what he does when no one is watching." Those words are etched in my mind, serving as a guiding compass for every decision I make. My father was strict, but never lacked love. I remember weekend mornings when he would sit at the large dining table reading the newspaper through his silver-framed glasses, while Ethan and I ran around the house pretending to be knights battling dragons. He would look up, smile, and call us over. "My two boys, come here. Tell me what you learned today." And so we would sit down, sharing innocent stories about school, the neighborhood kids, or the times we fell while climbing trees. He always listened, never interrupting, and always ended with a small lesson. "Remember, Derek, Ethan," he would say, "a man must take responsibility for his actions. No matter how hard it is, always do what's right." My mother, Barbara, was the heart of our family. She had a gentle smile, eyes that shone like moonlight, and a warm voice that could melt away any sorrow. If my father taught me about responsibility and integrity, my mother taught me about love and selflessness. She was an intelligent woman, a former literature teacher who devoted all her time to our family. Every evening she would sit by the fireplace telling Ethan and me fairy tales or reading poetry. I still remember her voice soothing like a river as she recited lines from Whitman or Frost. "Derek, my boy," she would say, holding my hand tightly, "strength doesn't mean being tough. A true man knows how to love and forgive." My mother had a way of making everything special. Every year for my or Ethan's birthday, she would bake a large cream cake, decorating it with intricate sugar flowers she crafted with care. I remember the sweet aroma of cookies baking in the kitchen, her soft humming, and the way she hugged us as if nothing in the world mattered more than family. "You boys are my greatest treasures," she would say, and I believed it with all my heart. Ethan, my younger brother, is 9 years my junior. He's different from me in many ways. While I loved running around, climbing trees, or playing ball with the neighborhood kids, Ethan preferred sitting alone with his sketchbook, drawing the forest behind our house or the birds soaring across the sky. He was sensitive, vulnerable, but had a resilient heart that I always admired. Ethan was never one to pick fights, but he always stood up for what he believed in. I remember once, when he was just 7, a bigger kid in the neighborhood teased him for liking to draw. Ethan just stood there clutching his pencil tightly and said, "I don't need to fight to prove I'm right." I was proud of him, though back then I just laughed and ruffled his hair. We grew up surrounded by love, but also under strict guidance. My parents never allowed us to become arrogant because of our privileged upbringing. "You live in a beautiful house, but don't let it define you," my father said. "Money can buy a house, but only love and integrity build a family." The mansion, with its long hallways, antique paintings on the walls, and the flower garden my mother tended, was more than a home. It was a symbol of our family's legacy, of the values my parents wanted to pass down to us. One of my fondest memories is of family evenings in the grand dining room. The oak table was covered with a white silk cloth, laden with dishes my mother prepared herself: roast beef, mashed potatoes, and warm bread. My father would raise a glass of wine, his eyes gleaming with pride, and speak of family tradition. "This is our legacy," he would say, his deep, warm voice echoing through the room. "Not the house, not the money, but love, integrity, and responsibility. You boys must preserve it no matter what happens." Ethan and I would nod, though back then I didn't fully grasp the weight of his words. I only knew that sitting around that table with my mother's laughter, my father's firm yet warm voice, and Ethan's sparkling eyes, I felt safe. It was as if nothing in the world could break our family apart. As I grew older, I began to understand my responsibilities. My father would often take me to his study, where shelves were filled with books on history and philosophy. He would tell me about great men who stood up for justice, for their families. "Derek," he said, "one day you'll have to protect what matters, not with your fists, but with your heart and mind." I nodded, not fully understanding, but his eyes, stern, full of expectation, made me want to become a man he could be proud of. It was my parents' profound lessons that shaped who I am. When I decided to attend the United States Military Academy, my father looked at me with pride. "Son, you're choosing a difficult path, but I believe in you." My mother, though worried, smiled. "Take your heart with you, Derek. Don't let the military harden it." I hugged her tightly, promising I would never forget her teachings. But I never imagined that, just a few years later, that promise would be tested by losses and fractures I could never have foreseen. The mansion, once a symbol of love and unity, gradually became a battlefield where I had to fight to protect what remained of my family. When I was 21, immersed in the grueling days at the military academy, a phone call turned my world upside down. I was on the training field, drenched in sweat after a rigorous session, when the commanding officer summoned me to the office. "Monroe, urgent call from your family." My heart pounded, not from exhaustion, but from a sinking premonition. I grabbed the receiver, and Ethan's voice came through, trembling and choked with sobs. "Derek, Mom's gone." The world crumbled beneath my feet. I stood in that small, cold room with its stark white walls, feeling the air sucked out of my chest. "What did you say?" "Mom, how?" I asked, my voice breaking, though I knew Ethan wasn't lying. He cried, his sobs mingling with fragmented words. "A car accident, a truck that lost control, and Mom, the woman who was always the light of our family, was gone forever." I requested leave immediately and caught the earliest flight back to Virginia. When the plane landed, I was no longer Derek Monroe, the ambitious young man from the military academy. I was just a son who had lost his mother, confused and shattered. The mansion, once vibrant with Mom's laughter, was now cloaked in a terrifying silence. I stepped into the living room, where the light from the large windows seemed dimmer than ever. Ethan ran to me, throwing his arms around me, his tears soaking my shirt. "Derek, Mom's not coming back, is she?" he asked, his voice breaking. I couldn't answer, only held him tightly, trying not to collapse myself. My father sat in the large armchair where he used to read the morning paper. But this time, there was no newspaper in his hands. His eyes were red, his hands clutching Mom's silk handkerchief, the one she always carried. I wanted to hug him, to say something to ease his pain, but I just stood there, helpless. He looked at me, and his eyes were no longer those of the strong man I admired. They were empty, as if a part of his soul had left with Mom. Mom's funeral took place a week later, on a dreary, drizzling day. Family, friends, and Dad's colleagues gathered at the small church near the mansion. I stood by the coffin looking at Mom's serene face, feeling my heart constrict. Ethan held my hand trembling while Dad stood in a corner, silent, as if he didn't want anyone to see his pain. I wanted to scream, to demand why this had happened. But I stayed silent, knowing no words could bring her back. In the months that followed, the mansion felt alien. Laughter had vanished, replaced by a heavy silence. Dad threw himself into work, often absent, as if only work could help him forget the pain. Ethan, only 12, became more withdrawn. He stopped drawing pictures of the forest or the sky. Instead, he would sit alone in his room, clutching the wool scarf Mom had knitted for him. I tried to be there for Ethan whenever I could, but my studies and training at the academy limited me to phone calls or weekend visits. "Derek, do you think Mom's watching us?" Ethan asked me once over the phone, his voice tiny as if afraid someone might hear. I swallowed hard, trying to keep my voice steady. "Mom's always here, Ethan, in our hearts." But even as I said those words, they felt insufficient. Nothing could fill the void Mom left behind. 2 years after Mom's passing, I graduated from the military academy and began my career in the Army. My life became long days of training and missions that demanded absolute focus. But every time I returned to the mansion, I felt the emptiness. Dad kept working relentlessly, but he seemed more distant. The family dinners where we once laughed were now just memories. Ethan grew up, but he carried a sadness I couldn't erase. Then one day, after returning home from a training stint, Dad called me into his study. He sat behind his large desk, his eyes a mix of nervousness and apprehension, rare for a man as confident as he was. "Derek," he said, his voice low, "I need to tell you something. I'm getting remarried." I was stunned, as if someone had punched me in the chest. Remarried? The man who said Mom was the love of his life now wanted to replace her? I tried to stay calm, but anger and pain surged within me. "Remarried? To whom?" I asked, my voice colder than I intended. "Her name was Vivian," he said. "A woman he met through work, someone who understood him and brought light after years of darkness." I wanted to scream that no one could replace Mom, but I only nodded, seeing the look in Dad's eyes. Not of a man in love, but of someone trying to fill a void. Vivian entered our lives like a strange breeze. She was beautiful, with glossy blonde hair and a perfect smile. But something in her eyes made me distrust her. She brought along her daughter, Holly, who was Ethan's age, 14. Holly had her mother's face, but a sharp, snarky personality. At our first meeting, Vivian hugged me, saying sweet words about wanting to be part of the family. "Derek, I've heard so much about you. I hope we'll be close." Her voice was honeyed, but I felt a suffocating falseness whenever I was near her. Holly was different. She looked at Ethan as if he were an intruder in the home we grew up in. "This house is huge," she said, smirking as we showed her the garden. "But it must be so boring, right, Ethan?" I saw Ethan lower his head, silent, and I had to restrain myself from saying something right then. Vivian and Holly moved into the mansion soon after. Dad held a small wedding, inviting only a few close friends and colleagues. I stood there in my military uniform, trying to smile for Dad, but my heart was heavy. Ethan, in a small suit, held my hand tightly, as if clinging to something familiar. "Derek, will everything be okay?" he asked, his voice trembling. I squeezed his hand. "It'll be fine, little brother. I promise." But I was wrong. Vivian and Holly's arrival marked the first crack in our family. Vivian quickly took over the mansion, changing everything to suit her tastes. Mom's rose bushes in the garden were replaced with exotic flowers she preferred. The paintings Mom had hung on the walls were taken down, replaced with modern art I couldn't understand. I tried to accept it for Dad's sake, but each change felt like a knife cutting into my memories of Mom. Ethan suffered the most. He started telling me about Holly's taunts, calling him a weak kid or an outsider. One time, over the phone, he cried. "Holly stole the picture I drew for Mom, Derek. She tore it up in front of me and laughed. Vivian told me not to make a big deal out of it. My blood boiled. That picture, a drawing of the forest Ethan had made for Mom for Thanksgiving, was his most precious memory of her. I requested leave and flew home immediately. That night in the living room, I confronted Vivian and Holly. "If you ever touch Ethan again, I won't let it slide," I said, my voice trembling with anger. Vivian smiled, that fake smile I despised. "Derek, you've misunderstood. We're family." Holly stood behind her mother, smirking as if daring me. Dad stood in the corner of the room, silent. I looked at him, hoping he'd say something, defend Ethan as he once protected us, but he only lowered his head, avoiding the conflict. In that moment, I felt a deep crack in my relationship with him. The loyalty I had for him began to waver. I couldn't let Ethan stay in that toxic environment. He was too sensitive, too vulnerable to face Vivian and Holly's cruelty. I started looking for a solution, a way to get Ethan out of the poisoned mansion. Finally, I found a prestigious boarding school in Massachusetts where he could study and live in a safe environment. I used my savings to cover the tuition, even if it meant tightening my belt for months. The day I took Ethan to the school, he stood at the mansion's gate, clutching a backpack filled with Mom's keepsakes. "Derek, I don't want to leave home," he said, his eyes red. "But I also don't want to stay here with them." I knelt down, looking into his eyes. "Little brother, this isn't leaving home. Home is where you and I are. I'll always be here whenever you need me." Dad stood at the gate, watching us leave. "Derek, what are you doing?" he asked, his voice full of pain. "This is Ethan's home, our home." I turned back, my heart heavy. "No, Dad, it's not our home anymore." I took Ethan's hand, got in the car, and drove away without looking back. The mansion, once a symbol of our family's love, was now nothing but ashes. I knew I had done the right thing by protecting Ethan, but in my heart I couldn't erase the pain. My father, the man I once admired, now felt more distant than ever. And I, Derek Monroe, stood at the crossroads of loyalty and hurt, wondering if our family could ever be mended. In the years that followed, after Ethan moved to the boarding school, I threw myself back into work. The military was where I found stability, where my father's lessons of discipline and loyalty echoed in every step I took. I advanced quickly, earning several commendations and medals. But each time I received a medal or praise, I thought of Dad, his proud eyes when I graduated from the military academy. I wanted to call him, to share the news, but every time I picked up the phone, I hesitated. The distance between us, though not thousands of miles, felt deeper than any ocean. Ethan, now an 18-year-old teenager, occasionally called me from the boarding school. His voice was less shaky, but I could still hear the sadness in every word. "Derek, I miss home," he said one late night during a call. "Not the mansion, but our family, the way it used to be." I swallowed hard, trying to keep my voice steady. "Me too, little brother. But don't worry too much. I'll always be here for you." I tried to reconnect with Dad, but every call was brief and awkward. Vivian was always there, inserting herself into our conversations with her sweet but cutting voice. "Derek, your father's very busy, but he's so proud of you," she'd say. I could feel her presence building an invisible wall between Dad and me. Then on a stormy day when I was 31, now a lieutenant colonel with a demanding workload, Ethan called me. His voice panicked. "Derek, Dad's sick, really sick." My heart tightened. "What's wrong? Who told you?" I asked, trying to stay calm. Ethan explained that a friend of Dad's, Mr. Thompson, had contacted him. My father, Raymond Monroe, the man who was once as strong as a mountain, was now bedridden with a terminal illness, liver cancer in its final stage. I immediately requested leave despite my packed military schedule. When the plane landed in Virginia, I was no longer Lieutenant Colonel Derek Monroe. I was just a son, desperate to see his father, to mend the cracks I had let linger for too long. But when I arrived at the mansion, the large iron gate was locked, and the person who greeted me was none other than Vivian. She stood at the entrance wearing an expensive silk dress, her fake smile still intact. Behind her stood two burly security guards, towering like stone statues. "Derek, you're here. Your father, he's very weak, not seeing anyone," she said. I tried to stay calm, but anger flared within me. "I'm his son. I want to see my father." Vivian shook her head, her tone falsely sympathetic but authoritative. "The doctor said he needs rest. Please understand." I wanted to push past her, to run to Dad's room, but I knew that would only make things worse. I stood there under the blazing red sunset, feeling my blood boil. The guards stared at me with emotionless eyes, their arms crossed, ready to act if I crossed a line. I clenched my fists, my nails digging into my palms until they stung, but I couldn't let Vivian win. I couldn't let her sever the last thread between me and my father. Taking a deep breath, I forced my voice to stay steady, though each word felt wrenched from my chest. "Vivian, you have no right to stop me. My father is in there, and I will see him whether you like it or not." She tilted her head, her smile unwavering, but I saw a cold glint flash in her eyes. "Derek, you're too emotional. Go home and I'll call you when your father's feeling better." Her words were like a slap, sweet but cutting, as if I were a stranger, not the son of the man lying in a sickbed in this very house. I took a step back, not out of fear, but because I needed time to think. I wasn't an impulsive boy anymore. I was a lieutenant colonel trained to stay calm in the most intense situations. But this wasn't a battlefield. This was my family, and that made it infinitely harder. I looked at Vivian, then at the towering iron gate behind her, leading to the mansion. The home that was once my sanctuary, now an impenetrable fortress. "You'll regret this," I said, my voice low but firm, then turned and walked back to my car. Sitting in the car, I gripped the steering wheel, my breathing heavy. I couldn't let Vivian control everything. My father was in there, frail, possibly needing me more than ever. I thought of his proud eyes when I graduated from the military academy, his words, "A man must stand up for what matters." And Dad, more than anyone, mattered to me now. I pulled out my phone and dialed the local police hotline. A calm, professional female voice answered, "Fairfax County Police, how can we assist you?" I took a deep breath, trying to keep my voice steady. "My name is Derek Monroe. I'm at my family's mansion, 1427 Oakwood Road, Virginia. My father is gravely ill, and the woman in the house, not my mother, is preventing me from seeing him. I'm his son, and I need to get inside." The officer asked a few questions, and I answered, keeping my responses concise but clear. "We'll send a unit right away," she said. I hung up, feeling a fraction of the weight lift, but the tension still clung to me. I sat in the car, eyes fixed on the gate, waiting. 15 minutes later, a patrol car arrived, its blue and red lights flashing in the dusk. 2 officers stepped out, a middle-aged man with a stern face and a younger woman holding a notepad. I got out of the car, introduced myself, and explained the situation briefly. The male officer nodded, glancing at the gate. "We'll talk to her. Stay calm." They rang the bell, and after a few minutes, Vivian appeared, still in her silk dress, her smile now even more artificial. "Oh, officers, what's the matter?" she asked, her voice dripping with sweetness. I stood behind the officers, feeling my anger rise again. "We received a report that Mr. Monroe here is being prevented from seeing his father," the female officer said, her tone calm but firm. "He's the son of the homeowner, and he has a right to enter." Vivian blinked, feigning surprise. "Oh goodness, it's a misunderstanding. Derek, I wasn't stopping you. Your father is just very weak, and I was protecting him." She turned to me, her smile widening, but her eyes were icy. "If you want to come in, of course you can. I'm only looking out for your father." I clenched my jaw, knowing she was putting on an act. But I said nothing, only nodding to the officers. "I want to go in now." Vivian opened the gate, leading us inside, the 2 guards stepping back but keeping their eyes locked on me as if I were a threat. Inside the mansion, everything was as grand as ever, but it was no longer my home. Mom's paintings were gone, replaced entirely. The scent of roses from the garden was absent, overtaken by Vivian's overpowering perfume. She led me and the officers upstairs to the master bedroom where Dad was lying. The officers stayed outside the door as I stepped in, my heart pounding. Dad lay in bed so frail I barely recognized him. His skin was pale, his eyes cloudy, and medical tubes wound around him like chains. I knelt by the bed, taking his hand, feeling the faint warmth from his thin fingers. "Dad, it's me," I whispered, my voice catching. He opened his eyes, looked at me, and a faint smile crossed his lips. "Derek, my boy," he said, his voice hoarse. "I'm sorry for everything." I wanted to say more, to ask why he let Vivian take control, why he grew so distant from me and Ethan. But I only held his hand tighter, tears streaming down my face. "I'm here, Dad. I'll always be here." Vivian stood at the door watching, and I felt her gaze like a knife in my back. The officers, seeing I had been allowed in, nodded to Vivian. "Looks like everything's in order," the male officer said. "Call us if you need anything." They left, and as the sound of the patrol car faded, Vivian's smile vanished. She clapped her hands, and the two guards stepped into the room, swift as shadows. "Derek, you've seen your father. Now leave," she said, her voice devoid of any sweetness. I stood, turning to her, trying to stay calm. "You can't kick me out of my own home." But before I could say more, the guards grabbed my arms, pulling me from the room. I struggled, but they were stronger than I expected, and I didn't want to hurt Dad by starting a fight in front of him. "Vivian, you'll pay for this," I shouted as they dragged me down the stairs. She followed, her steps light as a cat's, her voice cold. "Derek, don't make this worse. Your father needs peace, and you're causing a disturbance." They shoved me out the gate, and the iron door slammed shut behind me. I stood there under the darkening sky, my breath ragged. I had seen Dad, but only for a few fleeting minutes, and Vivian had ensured it would be the last. I gripped my phone, wanting to call the police again, but I knew they wouldn't help further. Vivian was too cunning, too skilled at hiding her schemes. But I couldn't give up. My father was still in there, frail, and I knew he needed me, needed Ethan, even if just to hold his hand one more time. I returned to the military base, but my mind was no longer on missions or orders. All I could think about was how to break through the wall Vivian had built between me and my father. The days that followed were a series of desperate efforts. I called Dad every day, sometimes 3 or 4 times, but never got an answer. The phone would ring, then go to voicemail, and Vivian's saccharine voice would chime. "This is the Monroe residence. Please leave a message." I left dozens of messages, my voice alternating between pleading and angry. "Vivian, please let me speak to my father. I'm his son." But there was no response. I tried texting, sending short messages. "Dad, it's Derek. I want to know how you're doing. Please call me." But the phone screen remained silent, as if my words had fallen into a black hole. I didn't stop there. I wrote letters, long handwritten ones, the way Mom used to when she had something important to say. I told Dad about my days in the military, about Ethan, about how I missed our family evenings by the fireplace. I wrote that I was sorry for letting the distance between us grow, that I wanted to see him, even just one more time. I sent those letters to the mansion, hoping they'd reach him. But weeks passed with no reply. I began to wonder if Dad ever received my letters, or if Vivian had intercepted them just as she blocked every path to him. I reached out to Ethan, now in his final year of college, and he reported the same. "Derek, I called Dad too, but Vivian always answers," he said, his voice heavy with frustration. "She says he's sleeping or in treatment, but I don't believe her. She's doing something, Derek." I heard the pain in Ethan's voice, and it cut into my heart like a knife. I wanted to reassure him, to say everything would be okay, but I couldn't lie. "I'll find a way, Ethan," I promised, though I didn't even know where to start. I tried contacting Dad's old friends, like Mr. Thompson, but they too were shut out by Vivian. "She's not letting anyone in, Derek," Thompson said over the phone, his voice laced with helplessness. "I tried to visit Raymond, but she said he didn't want to see anyone. I don't know what else to do." Anger surged within me, but more than that, I felt powerless. I was a lieutenant colonel, trained to face any challenge, Yet against Vivian, I felt like a failure, unable to protect my father as he battled illness. About a month later, while I was at the base preparing for a briefing, my phone buzzed. I glanced at the screen and saw the mansion's number. My heart raced, hoping it was Dad. But when I answered, Vivian's voice came through cold and composed. "Derek, I'm calling to inform you. Your father, Raymond, passed away this morning." I froze as if the world had collapsed around me. "No, that's not possible," I muttered, but Vivian continued as if reading a formal announcement. "He passed peacefully. I did my best to care for him. The funeral will be held this weekend. You and Ethan should come." I don't recall what I said, or if I said anything at all. I only remember the emptiness, as if a part of my soul had been torn away. Dad, the man who taught me about integrity and responsibility, was gone, and I hadn't been there for his final moments. I called Ethan immediately, my voice choking as I broke the news. "Derek, why weren't we allowed to see him?" he asked, his sobs over the phone tearing my heart apart. I picked Ethan up from his dorm and we flew to Virginia together, preparing for the funeral. As we entered the small church near the mansion, the same one where Mom's funeral was held, I felt like I was reliving a nightmare. A crowd gathered, Dad's old friends, colleagues, and unfamiliar faces all there to say goodbye. Vivian and Holly stood at the center, playing the roles of grieving wife and daughter. Vivian wore an elegant black dress, tears streaming down her face, but her eyes were cold, as if she were performing a meticulously rehearsed act. Holly stood beside her, head bowed, but I caught her glancing at me, a faint smirk flickering across her face. Ethan and I stood in a corner, holding hands, trying to stay strong. I looked at the coffin where Dad lay and felt regret crushing my chest. I hadn't done enough to break through Vivian's wall. I hadn't been there when he needed me most. Ethan squeezed my hand, tears falling silently. "Derek, will Dad forgive us?" he asked, his voice trembling. I hugged him, whispering, "Dad always loved us, Ethan. Nothing will ever change that." After the funeral, Ethan and I decided to return to the mansion. We didn't expect much, just to retrieve a few of Dad's keepsakes, perhaps his favorite wristwatch or the notebook where he used to jot down thoughts about Mom. It was a way to keep him close, to feel that he was still watching over us. But when we arrived, the large iron gate was locked and Vivian stood at the entrance, Holly by her side, both like gatekeepers of a fortress. "Derek, Ethan," Vivian said, her voice sweet but cutting. "I'm so sorry about your father, but you can't come in." I was stunned, feeling as if I'd been slapped. "This is our home," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. "We just want to take a few of Dad's keepsakes." Vivian shook her head, her fake smile returning. "This house now belongs to me and Holly. Raymond made a will before he passed, leaving all his assets, including the mansion, to us. If you want to contest it, talk to my lawyer." She handed me a piece of paper with Dad's signature, declaring that the $70 million mansion and everything in it now belonged to her and Holly. Ethan gripped my hand, trembling. "Derek, Dad wouldn't do this," he whispered, his eyes red. "He loved us. He wouldn't." I looked at him, my heart breaking. I wanted to break down the gate, to storm in, to scream that this was our home, our parents' legacy. But Vivian's eyes, cold, confident, told me she knew she had won. "Vivian," I said, my voice firm, "you may keep this house, but you can't take what our parents left us. I'll find the truth." She only smiled, saying nothing, and signaled to the 2 guards behind her. They didn't touch us, but their presence was a clear warning. I took Ethan's hand, pulling him back to the car. "Come on, little brother. We'll find a way." As the car pulled away from the mansion, a fire ignited in my chest. Vivian and Holly might think they'd won, but I was Derek Monroe, son of Raymond and Barbara Monroe, raised to fight for what's right. The mansion wasn't just property, it was a symbol of the love and legacy my parents had built with their lives. I wouldn't let schemers steal that away. I glanced at Ethan, seeing both grief and determination in his eyes, and I knew we would fight for justice together, no matter the cost. I drove Ethan to my small apartment on the outskirts of Virginia, where I stayed when not on duty at the base. He sat on the sofa, clutching the backpack containing the few keepsakes of Mom, his eyes vacant. "Derek, did Dad really make that will?" he asked, his voice trembling. I knelt before him, placing a hand on his shoulder. "Ethan, I don't believe it. Dad loved us. He wouldn't do that. I'll find out what's going on." I started by contacting Mr. Thompson, Dad's close friend, the only one who had tried to warn me about Vivian. I called, and he agreed to meet me at a familiar coffee shop downtown. When I arrived, Thompson sat in a corner, his aged face etched with worry. "Derek, I tried to tell you," he began, his voice low. "Vivian controlled everything once Raymond got sick. I don't trust her, but I have no proof." I told him about the will Vivian presented, how she claimed the mansion belonged to her and Holly. Thompson shook his head, his eyes flashing with indignation. "Raymond wouldn't do that. You know how much he loved you boys. That house is your family's legacy, not Vivian's." He paused, then continued, his voice quieter. "There's someone you should meet. Your father's old lawyer, Harold Grayson. He knows everything about Raymond's estate. If anyone knows the truth about the will, it's him." I tracked down Harold Grayson's office, a seasoned lawyer who had worked for Dad since I was a child. His office was in an old but elegant building in downtown Virginia, filled with wooden shelves packed with files and the scent of aged paper. Grayson, a man in his 60s with silver hair, greeted me with a warm but worried look. "Derek, I'm so sorry about your father," he said, motioning for me to sit. "I wanted to reach out to you, but Vivian, she made things difficult." I explained the will Vivian showed us, how she locked the mansion and claimed it as hers and Holly's. Grayson listened, nodding slowly, but I noticed his hand tightening around the pen on his desk. "Derek," he said, his tone serious, "I worked for your father for over 30 years. I knew Raymond like I knew myself. He would never leave everything to Vivian without considering you and Ethan." He stood, opened a locked drawer, and pulled out a thick file. "This is what you need to know," he said, placing it before me. "Before he became gravely ill, Raymond set up a secret trust. He wanted to ensure the mansion and most of his assets went to you and Ethan. The will Vivian presented, I question its legitimacy." My heart pounded. "You mean the will could be fake?" Grayson nodded. "Possibly. Or it was made under duress when Raymond was no longer lucid. Vivian was present at all his final meetings with other lawyers, and I was excluded. That's highly unusual." I felt a spark of hope, but also a surge of anger. If Grayson was right, Vivian hadn't just kept me from Dad, she'd manipulated him in his final days. I clenched my fists, trying to stay calm. "How do we prove it?" I asked. Grayson sighed. "It won't be easy, Derek. We need evidence. The original trust, recordings, or any document showing Raymond's true intentions. Vivian is careful, but she's not perfect. I'll start investigating from my end, but you need to gather information too. Talk to anyone close to your father in his final months." I left Grayson's office with a mix of hope and determination. I knew this wouldn't be easy, but I was trained to face tough challenges. In the military, I learned to plan, be patient, and never give up. Now I'd apply those skills to protect my parents' legacy. I called Ethan, telling him about the trust and the doubts about the will. "Derek, if Dad did that for us, Vivian's lying," he said, his voice filled with excitement. "We have to do something." I smiled through the phone, hearing his resolve. "We'll fight, little brother. Together." I began my investigation. First, I contacted people who had worked for Dad, his secretary, driver, and the mansion's former housekeeper, Clara, who had quit shortly after Vivian moved in. Clara agreed to meet me at a small park near her home. When I arrived, she hugged me tightly, her eyes red. "Derek, I'm so sorry about your father. Raymond was a good man. I wanted to tell you sooner, but Vivian..." Clara revealed that in Dad's final months, Vivian controlled everything in the mansion. She fired most of the old staff, replacing them with people loyal to her. "I overheard Vivian on the phone once. Clara whispered, glancing around as if afraid of being watched. She mentioned a new lawyer, not Grayson, and something about the paperwork being handled. I'm not sure, but I think she was planning something. Clara's words were a piece of the puzzle I was trying to assemble. I thanked her, promising to stay in touch, and continued my search. I reached out to doctors who had treated Dad, but they refused to share information, citing patient privacy. However, a former nurse who had cared for him in the hospital agreed to talk over the phone. Lieutenant Colonel Monroe, she said, her voice low. I shouldn't say this, but Vivian was always there when Raymond signed papers. Once he looked so weak, like he didn't know what he was signing. The pieces were starting to fit, but I still needed concrete evidence. I worked closely with Grayson, who began reviewing financial transactions tied to Dad. He discovered that some of Dad's accounts had been transferred to Vivian's name before his death. Unusual, since Dad always managed his assets meticulously. This could indicate coercion, Grayson said, but we need the original trust to prove it. Meanwhile, Vivian and Holly didn't sit idle. One day I received a letter from Vivian's lawyer, Charles Whitaker. It warned Ethan and me to stop harassing them and threatened legal action if we continued slandering the will. I tore the letter up and threw it in the trash, but I knew Vivian was trying to intimidate us. She had money, connections, and the cunning to hide her actions. But I wasn't one to back down. Ethan and I decided to confront her directly. We returned to the mansion not to beg, but to demand the original will. When we arrived, Holly opened the gate, her eyes full of defiance. What do you want now? She asked, smirking. Mom already made it clear, this house is ours. We want to see the will, I said firmly. The original, not a copy, Holly scoffed, calling for her mother. Vivian appeared, her fake smile intact. Derek, Ethan, you boys are persistent. The will has been legally recognized. You don't stand a chance. I stepped forward, looking her in the eye. Vivian, you know the truth. My father would never abandon us. If you're so confident, show us the original will. Or are you afraid of something? For the first time, her smile faltered, just for a moment, but enough for me to know I was on the right track. Vivian quickly regained her composure. You want to play legal games? Fine. Talk to my lawyer. She turned back into the house, slamming the door, leaving Ethan and me at the gate. But I wasn't discouraged. I knew she was hiding something, and I would find out what it was. The legal battle officially began. Mr. Grayson filed a motion with the court demanding a review of the will Vivian presented. He also submitted evidence of the trust Dad had established, though we still hadn't located the original. Vivian and Holly, backed by their lawyer Whitaker, fought back fiercely. They hired experts to argue that Dad had voluntarily created the new will and that the trust was merely an incomplete draft. The court hearings were grueling. Vivian appeared in expensive dresses, playing the part of a pitiful widow, while Holly sat beside her, feigning tears. Ethan and I, with Grayson's support, held our ground, but each session was a mental battle. At times, I felt like I was fighting a venomous snake. The more you cut off its head, the more it grew back. Then a turning point came. One morning, Grayson called me to his office, his voice brimming with excitement. Derek, we found it, he said, handing me a small USB drive. Someone from your father's company kept a backup of the trust in the internal system. It has Raymond's digital signature verified by a notary. I opened my laptop and reviewed the document on the USB. It was the trust, clear and detailed, stating that the mansion and most of the assets would go to Ethan and me, with a small portion left to Vivian to ensure she wasn't destitute. Dad's signature, along with the date, was undeniable proof. This is the truth, I said, my voice trembling with emotion. Dad never abandoned us. The final hearing took place a month later. With the trust as evidence, Grayson exposed the forgery in Vivian's will. Whitaker tried to counter, but his arguments crumbled against the authenticated document. The judge ruled Vivian's will was invalid, and the trust represented Dad's final wishes. The mansion, along with most of the estate, was returned to Ethan and me. When the verdict was announced, Vivian and Holly sat in silence, their faces pale. I looked at Vivian not with triumph, but with a mix of relief and pain. "You lost, Vivian," I said, my voice low. "But what I regret most is that you stole my final moments with my father." Vivian didn't respond, only stood and pulled Holly out of the courtroom. Ethan and I stood there holding hands, feeling that justice had finally been served. The mansion, the symbol of our family's love and legacy, was ours again. After the trial, Ethan and I returned to the mansion. Stepping through the iron gate, I felt like I was coming home after a long journey. We walked through the garden where Mom's roses once bloomed and into the living room where memories of our parents still echoed. I found Dad's watch still in his desk drawer. Ethan found the notebook filled with Dad's careful handwriting about Mom. "Derek," Ethan said, his voice choked, "we did it. Mom and Dad would be proud." I hugged him, tears streaming down my face. "Yes, little brother. We preserved their legacy." Ethan and I decided not to live in the mansion. It was too large, too filled with painful memories. Instead, we turned it into a community center, hosting charitable programs and teaching children about art and literature, things Mom loved. It was our way of honoring our parents, keeping their legacy alive forever. This journey taught me that family is not just about blood, but about love, loyalty, and the fight for what is right. I, Derek Monroe, learned to balance the strength of a soldier with the compassion my mother instilled in me. And though Vivian tried to take everything, she could not steal the values my parents planted in Ethan's heart and mine. Standing in the mansion's garden where Mom's roses once bloomed, I felt a peace I thought was lost forever. The morning sunlight filtered through the pine trees, casting shimmering patches across the lawn, just as it did when I was a boy running around with Ethan. The house, with its gray stone walls and towering windows, was no longer a battlefield of pain and betrayal. It had become once again a symbol of family love, of the legacy my parents built with their hearts. Ethan stood beside me, clutching Dad's notebook, its yellowed pages filled with his words about Mom, love letters written in his loneliest days. "Derek," he said, his voice steady but deep, "we did it. We kept our promise to Mom and Dad." I turned to him, seeing his eyes shine, no longer those of a vulnerable boy, but of a resilient young man full of hope. I smiled, placing a hand on his shoulder. "Yes, little brother. We did." The decision to turn the mansion into a community center wasn't easy. It was more than a home. It was our childhood, memories of fireside evenings, family dinners, and lessons from our parents. But we knew keeping it for ourselves wouldn't make Mom and Dad proud. Mom, with her selflessness, always wanted to share joy with others. Dad, with his nobility, believed a true legacy is what you leave for the world. So we began the plan: transform the mansion into a space for underprivileged children, where they could learn art, literature, and skills to build their futures. We named the center Monroe House in honor of our parents. Ethan, with his artistic talent, designed a large mural in the main hall, depicting a vibrant forest like the one Mom once painted for him. I watched him work, his brush gliding across the wall, and felt Mom smiling somewhere, proud of her youngest son. I contributed too, using my military experience to organize leadership programs for teens. Each time I saw a child smile while painting their first picture or completing a lesson, I felt like I was carrying on our parents' legacy. One afternoon, as the center opened, Ethan and I stood on the second-floor balcony looking down at the garden where children played, their laughter echoing like our childhood memories. "Derek," Ethan said, his voice thick with emotion, "I think Mom and Dad would love this place." I nodded, tears welling up. "They would, Ethan. They'd be so proud." But our journey didn't end with reclaiming the mansion. It was a journey of healing, not just between Ethan and me, but with our memories of Dad. In his final months, I was angry with him, angry that he let Vivian infiltrate our family, that he didn't stand up for us. But finding the trust, reading his words of love for Ethan and me, I realized Dad never abandoned us. He was trapped in his own mistakes, in the pain of losing Mom, and in Vivian's manipulation. Understanding this, I learned to forgive as Mom taught me. A true man knows how to open his heart and forgive. Ethan and I also mended our relationship. The years apart, me consumed by the military, him at boarding school, had created a distance between us. But the fight for our legacy brought us closer. We weren't just brothers, we were teammates facing challenges and triumphing together. One evening, sitting in the center's living room, I looked at Ethan and said, "Little brother, I'm proud of you." He smiled, a full smile untainted by sadness for the first time in years. "I'm proud of you too, Derek." As for Vivian and Holly, they vanished from our lives after the trial. I heard they moved to another city, living off the small sum Dad left Vivian in the trust. Part of me wanted to feel vindicated, but I couldn't. Mom taught me that compassion is strength, not weakness. I didn't forgive what Vivian and Holly did, but I chose not to let hatred control me. Their lives, built on schemes and lies, were punishment enough. I finally learned to balance strength and compassion. In the military, I was trained to be tough, to face enemies without flinching. But this journey taught me that the real enemies weren't Vivian or Holly, but doubt, pain, and the cracks in our hearts. I fought not just to reclaim the mansion, but to preserve the values my parents passed down: love, loyalty, and responsibility. My story doesn't end here. Life goes on with new challenges, but I'm no longer afraid. I have Ethan, our parents' lessons, and Monroe House, a reminder that family, despite all losses, is the most precious thing. Love and loyalty overcome every trial, and a true legacy isn't in wealth, but in the values passed from generation to generation. I, Derek Monroe, will keep living, keep fighting, and keep loving just as my parents taught me.